that's a difference maker between us and a lot of our competitors that take the approach, well, I don't need to have as much inventory, or I don't need to have a lot of inventory because I can just get it and my customer will wait. That's what they've always done.
Yeah.
And that's 5-10 years ago mentality. Today's mentality is that if it's not here, they're going to call somebody else, and somebody else has it, they're not calling you back until that person, that individual, that business doesn't have it. And then you might get another shot. But if you have it, you're going to get the next call.
You're listening to Going Deep with Aaron Watson.
Get down.
You're going deep.
Thank you so much for coming on Going Deep. I'm really excited to be talking with you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
So I want to start off. You have an absolutely fascinating story into the position where you currently sit, new distribution center, all sorts of exciting growth happening over the last half decade or so. But to start things off, to clarify for people, when we describe COE Distributing as a office furniture wholesaler, can you articulate for people a little bit of who you're selling this office furniture to and where your kind of position lands within the broader marketplace for office furniture?
Sure. I'll do my best at that and clear it up a little bit. So as a wholesaler, we're not selling to the general public. It's strictly B2B, but it's a very narrow scope of B2B. So our clients are individuals, mainly businesses, that are reselling the products that we sell, office furniture and accessories, to their clients. So an example of one of our clients that would be known on a national scope would be Staples, WB Mason in the Pittsburgh market, Tri-State Office Products, Mount Lebanon Office Furniture, Bulldog Office Products. Those are the folks that we work with, and those are our target clients. Those are the only client type that we have. And our function and why we exist is that we have a significant amount of inventory, and we have the ability to get that inventory to market, whether that's to our clients and their partners in warehousing and installation, or drop ship directly to their clients at their direction. What fills that, and what the other, the front side of that looks like, is we source product directly from manufacturing partners globally. So in half a dozen countries around the world, we're working with vendors, manufacturers, to create and curate a broad and deep product scope, and for everything that you would need in an office today. And today's office looks a lot different, as you know, from offices even 5-10 years ago, but particularly 10, 20, 30 years ago when I got started in the business. So where we're sitting here today, it's a training room. There are no desks in here. There are mobile tables, stackable chairs, and even in our quote-unquote office space downstairs, it's teaming environments. It's open space, as opposed to tall panels, cubicles, where people were kind of locked into their own world. So a lot of different products that we bring together under now 3 roofs, with our 3rd distribution center opening up, to get it to market quickly.
And I want to talk a little about the open concepts a little bit, because there's a little bit of a backlash
Sure.
to that happening lately. But in that same vein of, you talked about some of the clients that you serve and obviously the manufacturers. Part of my understanding of your role as the wholesaler is the manufacturers want to do large batches, because that's where they get all of their margins from when they're able to scale out production. And some of these clients that you talked about, they have a need, but they might not necessarily have a need for that high quantity. And so the fact that you have this enormous warehouse space to hold product here, but also just your position as the wholesaler, is you can take those off the hands of the manufacturer who's hitting those enormous scale numbers, and then that distribution into smaller pools of inventory is kind of where the essence of your value lies. Is that a good way to explain it?
That's a great way to explain it, and that's a piece of it. So we're able to order by truckload or container load, depending on which country where our manufacturing partner is located, and large quantities of individual items, as opposed to 3 or 4 pieces of 100 items. We're ordering 100 pieces of 3 or 4 items. So the manufacturers get their economies of scale. They can run large production cycles on one item, And as you mentioned, that's where they can drive value from the technology they have in their facilities to produce high volume amounts. The other piece to it and why we exist and why we are important and becoming more important on a daily basis to all types of customers that we work with is the fact that we do have it in inventory, and our clients, the last thing they typically think about is office furniture. It's, well, we're going to redo this space. We need to pick out the wall paper. We need to pick out the draperies, the carpet, and all the technology. And then shortly before they're ready to open, oh, what about office furniture? And in cases like that, that's where we become extremely important and really one of the only sources available to solve that dilemma. We need to put 20 people in an office in 2 weeks. There's no manufacturer that's really capable of doing that domestically. We have 2,000 offices in inventory at any given time, and we can fulfill that need in 24 hours if necessary. So
Gotcha.
it's the quick to market as well as the large the volume capabilities of our purchasing power that bring value to why we exist and why we're important to clients.
And it's been a successful endeavor, as I mentioned, over the last half decade, a bunch of awards and commendations for fastest growing company, Inc. 5000, all that good stuff. But taking it back to the genesis, this company was started by your grandma.
Right.
And you grew up in the space. So talk to me a little bit about some of the first things that you were tasked with doing here when you were, young, teens, whatever, that helped you kind of get into the business and start to understand it.
Sure. So family business for sure. My grandmother started in the late 40s, well before I became a being, and I started in it, preteen, in 8, 9 years old, if not younger than that. And at that time, the business was a retail business, so we had a storefront. We were essentially one of our customers at that point when the origination of the business was office supplies, office furniture, machines, and at the time that I was growing up, and you probably don't even know what this thing is, but a mimeograph machine.
I don't know what that is.
It was a precursor to copiers. And
Oh, okay.
It was you had a hand crank on it and a carbon paper with ink, and you literally crank through page by page of church bulletins or documents that you needed to make multiple copies of. That's how you did it. And I can remember we used to create church bulletins for churches who couldn't afford to buy this machine. So on Saturdays for Sunday church, I would crank the handle on the mimeograph machine. So that was one of the early jobs that I did.
Yeah.
And growing up in the business, did a lot of different things. Dusted the shelves, took deliveries, walked deliveries downtown when there was a downtown to service in that manner. And then getting through high school years, making deliveries by vehicle. And that's the point in the mid-'80s when the wholesale business became into being. My father started the wholesale business in 1986 out of still running 4 retail stores, and I worked in the wholesale business for 2 summers while I was still going to school. And then 30 years ago this month, I decided to come back from school before finishing at Penn State and take over the wholesale business. And that was in December of 1989. So that's the origination of this business and me in it. And at that time, the business was generating about $20,000 a month in revenue. And I was the only employee for 2 years, and in those 2 years, really, literally learned the business from the ground up. Did everything, handled the warehouse, inventory control, accounts receivable, sales calls, secretary answering the phone, making deliveries, and in between making deliveries, made sales calls to folks that I wasn't delivering to that I noticed. I distinctly recall every town that I was in, I'd find the payphone, and there was a phone book hanging from a chain. I'd go to the Yellow Pages and tear out the office furniture section of the Yellow Pages, and when I got back to the office, I would key those numbers into my database, and that's how I continue to grow the business, making calls in that manner.
I love the hustle.
Yeah, there was a lot of that, and the learning was exciting for me. And I'm 19 years old, running a business, and all of my friends were at school or working in some type of blue collar job, and this was a little bit of freedom, but a lot of responsibility to take on what was essentially a business that had been started out of the family business. So there was some, and still is today, some deference to making sure that the family business continues to be successful.
So in those two different directions, the wholesale and the pre-existing business, can you talk a little bit more about that split? Was that other part shut down? Is it still in existence? Can you talk a little bit about that relationship? Because it's kind of an interesting dichotomy where you see, like, well, you're kind of selling the same thing, but when it's a very different buyer, when it's a very different scale, those are really drastically different businesses.
Sure. So for the first 4 to 5 years of the existence of the wholesale company, we were our own largest customer, and that's just the way that it worked out. In the mid 90s, excuse me, my dad sold the retail businesses and completely divested of that. So that was the quote unquote clean break from any association between the two, and the wholesale business then was really forced to stand on its own without that support of.
Was the decision to do that informed by the potential and the growth of the wholesale side, or an exhaustion with the retail? Or
definitely the exhaustion of the retail. He sold the retail businesses less than a year before Staples opened up here locally, locally being Uniontown. So he saw that coming and was able, and his interest from the retail business had certainly been reduced significantly, and we as a family, and he was leading that charge, dealing more in commercial real estate than the retail business. So
gotcha.
That was the reasoning there. But that was mid 90s, 94, 95.
And so from mid 90s on to 2006, it really did see some exciting growth up to the point, I believe I heard you say 21 million revenue in 2006.
2006, we were tracking about 22 million. Yeah. So when I closed the books in December of '89, we did about $220,000, so a little less than $20,000 a month in revenue. And from a wholesale perspective, certainly that's just not a lot of revenue, especially if you think about what's happening today in wholesale markets. But so taking it 100x from '89 to 2006, and a lot of factors led to that successful growth. One of the main being that my wife and I, my future wife and I, met each other in the early '90s, and ultimately were married in October of '94. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary.
Congratulations!
Thank you. Melanie still works in the business today, but she immediately came into the business and took over customer service and marketing. It was really the first full-time office employee, besides myself, of the company. The only other support that I had up to that point was a part-time secretary and warehouse and delivery folks. So she, from day one, handled the marketing and customer service, still handles marketing today. We fast forward a few years to 1997, hired our first outside sales rep, who's still with me today and is a minority ownership of the company today, Stan. And so 97, we're continuing to grow the business up through the early aughts, and we're ultimately into April of 2006, part of a roll-up within the industry. We were the third of 5 regional wholesalers that were purchased by a single entity and created a national footprint, a distribution footprint for office furniture only, really the first of its kind. That we continued as a division. Everyone that was working for myself at that time stayed on, and we continued to grow the business as a division of this larger company. From '06 to '08, we grew from 22 million to 36 million. We were the third largest of the 5 regional wholesalers that were purchased at the time that we were purchased. By the end of 2007, we were the largest. By the end of 2008, we were the only profitable and growing former entity, so division within that.
Yeah.
And what ultimately changed the direction of that company entirely was the fact that they ran out of cash in early 2009, which was in the heart of the recession. Certainly a factor in that, but not the main reason that the company lost the steam.
So before we lead to that, led to a very exciting event. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about two things. First, your decision. So it's not rare that when ownership of an organization changes, that most of, maybe even part of the negotiations is my people get to keep their jobs for an extended period of time. When that changes, there's always can be strife there. But something that you'll also see is for ownership that is selling their shares to the new owner, some sort of an earn out, some sort of a part of the negotiation of, hey, 6, 12, 18, 24 months, stick around, help this go smoothly, and then, carry on your merry way or stick around and we'll reassess when that happens. Were you sticking around as part of an earn out? Were you sticking around as part of a vision for how to, lasso all of that together and get even bigger through that roll up? Or how are you thinking about that choice as someone who is transferring ownership of a family business?
Yeah, definitely the latter. There was no earn-out component to it, and which ultimately turned out to be a good thing. But for me, it was the interest in the business and still wanting to be involved and having the ability to shape what the business would grow into. And that's the role that I really had on a national level, and was negotiating national accounts for the entire entity. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons why the exciting event that you alluded to was really able to happen, is because I was close enough to the business where I understood that the foundation of the business was sound. It was the way that it was run that created the unfortunate event that took place, which was by August, September of '09, it was clear that there was no other path other than bankruptcy for the business.
Yeah.
So in this past weekend, Thanksgiving weekend 2009, the bankruptcy became official, and I had the opportunity to read through that the bankruptcy documents, and was convinced with some help from my wife, Melanie, that it made sense to pursue the opportunity to buy it back. And less than a month later, that's what we accomplished. So late December of 2009, myself and a former owner and the largest creditor ultimately had bought the company back with 18 distribution centers nationwide out of bankruptcy.
And was what you bought was all of those companies together, or just the 1/5 that you had kind of brought to the table, that division?
So the group had all of it, and we had to address all 18 distribution centers, which there was no intent to continue to operate all 18. The state of the economy did not allow for that.
Okay.
So we knew that there had to be some trimming, to put it mildly. But the predefined locations, if you would, or the locations that we ultimately ended up with, were predefined through that process of the folks that were involved. So it wasn't a mad scramble after we ended up with it. We had determined who was going to operate what locations and who was going to liquidate or assist in liquidating other locations. So I bought 50% of the inventory out of the LA warehouse, all the inventory out of Kansas City, most of the inventory out of the Chicago facility. Those were facilities that ultimately were closed down, but we had to physically empty them and get rid of the product there. So we brought the majority of that product to this facility here where we're sitting today. So that was part of the process.
Gotcha. And now you have locations here in Smock, Pennsylvania, my first time to Smock, and then in North Carolina as well. Can you talk a little bit about the geographic significance of those locations, or how you even make a decision like that? I'm sure to some degree there's a hometown, where you grew up, where you've been, element to this, but how else do you make that kind of decision?
Sure. So where we're at today, Smock as the address that you came to. Uniontown is not that it's much bigger than Smock, but Uniontown is at least a bigger spot on the map, and folks in Western Pennsylvania have some sense of where Uniontown is. Nobody knows where Smock is.
Right.
Smock's the post office that delivers our mail, so we had to take the Smock address.
Gotcha.
That's why Smock is on our address. So hometown. Yeah. So the business back in the 40s was started in this area. In the 80s, it was the wholesale business originated here as well. In the early 90s, my father and I bought the piece of property that we're sitting on today, and it was a cornfield at that point. So we built the first building in '94, completed it, and my wife and I, after we returned from our honeymoon, moved into that location. The facility that we're in today was started to be constructed in 2000, and we just completed a year ago this week the doubling of our footprint here in this facility to get us to 300,000 square feet within this facility that we occupy today. So the other significance is that when we looked at a map and we contemplated as the business was growing in the early 90s, should we move it somewhere else? And at that point, Pittsburgh was within a day's drive of 2/3 of the country's population. You can get to Chicago, you can get to New York, you can get to the Carolinas. So logistically, it's a pretty decent location. The road system, not necessarily the greatest because there's hills, right? So it's not easy to get around necessarily, but the distance makes this a reasonable location logistically.
And then North Carolina allows for access to the whole kind of south?
Southeast, sure. And I opened that location in 2002, which was within the midst of a lot of unrest, after the dot-com bubble, after 9/11.
Yeah.
We opened that and made that a very successful venture for sure. So we took that spot back when we bought the business back in 2010.
So I'm noticing something here through your stories. So your big repurchase of the business, 2009, right after the Great Recession. Your purchase of the North Carolina location shortly after the dot-com bubble. What I'm sensing is that a conservatism, a capacity to maybe save and be strategic and come in when prices are low, when opportunity is high, to make some of these purchases that have created maybe the lungs to breathe life into the growth of your business. Am I accurate in that assessment?
It's pretty accurate. Yeah, not necessarily a verbalized strategy, but that is something that is always on my mind. We're aggressively conservative or conservatively aggressive, however you want to juggle those words around. But that's really the way that I operate overall from a business perspective, and take calculated risks and really look at where the opportunities are. And that's how we ended up really opening up our third distribution center last month. Well, it's December now, so 2 months ago in Houston. We'd been servicing that greater Houston, Dallas geography from our Charlotte facility, which is, if you look at a map, it's not easy to do.
Yeah.
1,500 miles plus or minus to get to the edge of our western edge of the territory from Charlotte. But the concentration of business that was there allowed us the ability to open up a facility there and support it. And it's a significant facility. That facility is larger than our Charlotte facility for a couple of reasons. One, the growth potential in that market. Texas as a state is just exploding. 3 of the top 10 most populous cities in the country are there and growing at a faster rate than just about anywhere else. And the reach that we have and now can service we have a component of our business that is .com, but we support our .com customers, again, not a B2C, but we can now get product for them to the West Coast in less than half the time at about 35 to 40% discount from the freight cost. So that's another component that the Houston facility allows us, is to really service our .com customers in a much more efficient and attractive way for them. So we become more competitive in the market.
So an area that I look at a lot is direct-to-consumer retail brands. So Casper Mattress, Warby Parker, I could go on and on down the list, but that is unequivocally a trend that has been very influential, very disruptive for retail over the last decade or so, primarily enabled by digital, primarily enabled by the capacity to do, in a certain sense, what a Staples or some of these other companies did, which was create the demand, create the brand that makes people say, I'm going to go there for that thing, and then cut back to fulfillment on the other side, maybe having that direct relationship with a manufacturer, or white labeling something through a wholesaler in some capacity. Do you, with this kind of digital revolution that is impacting everything, and the fact that you said you do have that .com presence, do you feel pressures to move in the direction of something direct to consumer back to kind of like the roots of this company? Or do you see another avenue by which to play that game of other brands that might be creating those direct to consumer experiences?
So we certainly see what's happening. The Amazon effect is the easiest way to refer to it and explain it, and people understand that, right? You can get anything you want on Amazon, and you can get it tomorrow, for the most part. That's certainly a concern of ours as to how that dynamic can influence and impact our industry. One of the, if it's an insulating factor, the majority of our products don't fit on and ship by a brown truck, right? They're big, they're bulky, and they're a little bit more complex than a Casper mattress or a Warby Parker set of glasses, or any other thing that you can think of that very neatly goes in an envelope or in a small box and arrives in 24 hours because it's light and it's inexpensive to ship. But a bigger view of that is that we feel we can continue to grow the business, grow the brand, and Office Source is the brand. COE Distributing is the wholesale entity, and Office Source is the brand and the that we've created and curated with this global sourcing initiative. The Office Source brand can be supported, and we can support that brand through our .com customers, some of which came from traditional brick and mortar. The really forward-thinking folks in retail already have created an online presence to address exactly what you just brought up, and that piece is not going to go away. It's going to become more competitive and more challenging. But we see ourselves as the Amazon support for those folks, are existing and soon, not yet connected to customers that need the warehouse of product to run their business.
Yeah.
And we are the manufacturer, and maybe that's a 5 years ago reference, and maybe today and 5 years from now we're the Amazon for our customers, which are the resellers. They have the B2C marketing kind of figured out, and we have the warehousing piece of it figured out in the logistics. And I would say that as we go forward, the logistics of it become more critical than the warehousing, because it's more complex. People want better service. They want white glove service, and how all that fits into the experience is critical.
And what's fascinating, tying more lines between different industries, when people talk about enterprise software and different forms of B2B software, a lot of the disruption and changes that have happened in that space over the last decade are informed by consumer-facing software solutions, where people are used to that seamless user interface, that design that normalizes that software experience. And then when you go to some other part of your life and it doesn't match that, there's kind of a jarring effect between what's been normalized in one part of your life and another. And so what I'm really hearing is, the Amazon effect, or that pace of, well, I got my, reindeer mug in 24 hours or something shipped to my house. That's that's infecting people's expectations across the board, regardless of whether or not that's a Amazon specific initiative.
You're absolutely right. If you can order paper towels and get them tomorrow from your home, why can't you order a desk and get it tomorrow at your office? So that same, and it's a mindset. The product doesn't matter to the consumer. It's, well, I can go online and I can get this. I should be able to go online and get that and everything else. And it's interesting that you say that. I had a conversation this morning with one of our Rising Stars, which is an employee engagement program that we have here, identifying individuals within the company that are the next group of management or supervisory folks. And the conversation this morning with Paola was, our website is not as clean for our customers as it is when I go on Amazon, because our customers potentially have to log in with 2 logins to get to where they want to go. And her words were, when I go on Amazon Prime, I just log in once and that's it.
Yep.
And why can't we provide that experience? So exactly to your point is that everybody's expectations is that it becomes easier and it becomes like the best that's out there. So that's one of the challenges that not only we, but anybody in business today, continuous improvement and identifying how you get to what the best in class is before it becomes too late and you're too far behind for it to even matter.
And I'm imagining from like a speed standpoint, there's the user experience of when I'm on the website, how many clicks or how many whatever logins I have to do. But as you say, you're expanding your footprint here, and this property that you already had, you're expanding the warehouse to carry more. I'm wonderfully ignorant as it pertains to logistics. So if I'm completely wrong, you can, bat me away in 2 seconds. But having more stuff on site, maybe greater variety, but even just more in the back here present, allows that turnaround to be even more expedient for the customer that may be expecting that, versus, well, we have to get it here and then we have to get it to you. That larger holding area plays a part in that. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, and that's a difference maker between us and a lot of our competitors that take the approach. Well, I don't need to have as much inventory, or I don't need to have a lot of inventory because I can just get it and my customer will wait. That's what they've always done. Yeah, and that's 5-10 years ago mentality. Today's mentality is that if it's not here, they're going to call somebody else, and somebody else has it, they're not calling you back until that person, that individual, that business doesn't have it, and then you might get another shot. But if you have it, you're going to get the next call. You're going to get that business, and you're going to get the next call. So, ironically, we just had a project finish up. We work with the CAT school at Pitt, and the graduate school interns did an inventory rationalization project for us. We tasked them with, hey, how can we carry less inventory but still have the right amount of inventory on hand with our growth trajectory, customer demand, and what do we need to do? And the first statement that they told us and they had a ton of results, and we've worked with them a half a dozen times with the school and really enjoy it. But the first statement that they told us before they got into the meat of what they really created and found was, it will cost you more money to not have to have less inventory than it will to have more inventory than you need, because of that very thing that I just explained. Is that if you have too much inventory, the worst that you can have is some carrying costs, and maybe you're running out of space. Yeah. But you're going to get the order, and you're going to get the next order. If you have too little inventory, you're not going to get that order. But it's not that order that creates the problem. It's the next 6 that you don't get because you said no, you can't fulfill the first order. So that client is going to the next person who can fulfill it, and they'll stay there until they can't fulfill it.
And the other nice thing about this is, as I look at the desk in this room and the variety of chairs that you have, is it's not like it's something that is perishable and prompt to go bad. And stylistically, it's not as if you're in fast fashion and like what yesterday's sweater that was in is now out. Sure, tastes change, aesthetic preferences, shift in time. I don't know how you feel about like the Cybertruck that Elon and Tesla came out with, but these are things that tend to look the same year after year. So another part of that is we can keep it on our shelves because it will probably still be a viable thing to sell 1, 2, 3 years down the road.
Now, obviously, holding inventory for more than 12 months is not desirable, but your point is well taken, and we take the same approach. There's not a ton of, there are trends in furniture, more so home furniture, and we kind of, the commercial office follows the home environment industry, lagging 12, 24, sometimes 36 months. And we look to that industry as colors in particular. If a color holds for 24 months, 2 years, and I guess now the cycle is 6 months. So if it holds for 2 to 3 6-month cycles, we know that color is coming to commercial in 2 to 3 years. Gotcha. Because it starts to take hold in the home market, and more talking about designs within the office today. There's more home design input where you have these casual spaces where the traditional conference room, there's not a 10-foot long conference table in this room. There's seating like that where you can, 2 or 3 people sit down in a very comfortable home type chair. We refer to that as resimercial. So residential and commercial blend, and you have these spaces throughout offices that invite casual, impromptu conversations as opposed to scheduling the conference room and going down for a formal meeting. There's very few formal meetings, particularly in fast-paced companies, that people don't have the time to schedule an hour-long formal meeting day after day after day. You have 10 to 15-minute discussions, and for 10 to 15-minute discussions, you need however many people are going to be in that discussion, and that many chairs, or maybe half that many because half the people stand, or you get around a high-top table, you drink your coffee, you have a meeting, and you're done, and you're going about your day. So those things tend to drive some of the product choices that we make as well. And our latest catalog just dropped. They just arrived yesterday. So we've implemented a lot of those things into the 2020 program.
Very cool. JD, I'm frustrated because we've already run like near the maximum time that I said that this interview was going to be, but I'd be remiss before we ask our standard last two questions if I didn't ask about this as well. As we walked in, there was a big stack of books. And in addition to your Rising Stars program that you have and your impetus around employee retention, you run a book club within your company that everyone kind of is reading the same thing and then having a conversation about that. Can you teach me, as an aspiring, successful business owner and CEO myself, and the audience out there, how to run a good book club or book program within a company like yours?
Sure. Well, I'll give my impression of that and what's worked for us. And the very first thing for me that's important is that I read the book and that I can connect with the message that's there. And that message is beyond just business. It's got to parallel both business and personal life lessons. So if it's strictly business, you can certainly do it. But I don't think that's the first, second, or third book that you introduce. You've got to get some a comfort level and some genuine interest in reading, number one, and participation across multiple departments, number two, before you can just go strictly business. So the first key component is that it has to resonate with me. There has to be a personal aspect to it so that when employees that are reading this on their own time sit down and read it on their own time, that they get a greater benefit than just 100% business focused,
Right.
where they may feel that they're being asked to do unpaid work and it's only benefiting the business. The books that we've done company wide have all had a very personal aspect to it as well.
Give me like 1, 2, 3 book recommendations here they're staples of your rotation.
Sure. So Becoming Your Best was the book that got it all started for us, written by Steven Schallenberger. And that book has 12 chapters, 12 bedrock principles that you should live by and work by, all things that you've probably already very aware of and are probably doing half of those or more today. So it's more of a refresher, reinforcement, and an enlightening, hey, these are the things that are pretty standard, but the more you focus on them and the more aware of these things that you are, the better you're going to be, the better person you're going to be, the better business you're going to be a part of and run in the case of a CEO. So that's number one. Anything by Patrick Lencioni would be number two. The Getting Naked is an interesting title and a very good.
Good for in the airport if it's on the rack to get the attention relative to the other books.
Or sitting in the terminal reading it, and folks are wondering what's going on there.
Turn a few heads. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's a great sales book, but a great personal improvement book as well. And then The Power of Moments, which is the book, the pile of books that you saw when you came in. That's the book for the first of the year, and we'll be doing that in conjunction with the Pittsburgh Penguins. We are the first and only employment engagement partner with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So that partnership started this past August, and it is exactly what it says it is. This program is focused on the employees. It's not hey, we've got game tickets, and the owners are going to go to games, and maybe we'll invite a few employees here and there. It's programs that really provide employee enrichment, and we had another ceremony today. It's called the Warrior Helmet, where it's an idea generated from the Penguins, but they shared that with us, and we now have a COE Warrior Helmet that every 2 weeks, peer-to-peer handoff of that helmet, which represents in the Penguins locker room not necessarily the first, second, or third star of the game, but it's the player who dug the puck out of the boards, took the hits, gave the hits, just did the dirty, gritty work that's necessary for a team or a company to be successful. And that's what's translated into the COE Warrior Helmet. So we have a Pittsburgh Penguins game-worn helmet that gets handed off every 2 weeks, peer-to-peer. And the employee handing it off ideally identifies 1 or 2 core values that we work by here, and that's as identifying that into the recipient of the helmet. And that happened today. Teamwork was the one that was identified today as a main reason why the handoff went to this individual. So
beautiful. Every team needs characters like that. I love that tradition.
Right, absolutely.
Jay, this has been awesome. I've learned so much. This is one of my favorite interviews I've had in a while. I want to make sure that people can check out your company, everything that you guys are up to. What digital coordinates can we provide people that want to learn more about you and your business?
Sure. OfficeSourceFurniture.com is the website. That's the brand. COE Distributing.com. is the company website. Very similar websites. Products are similar, but the ability to see the types of products that we sell and have available. And there's also a partner map on there, identifier. So whatever locale within the U.S. or the Caribbean that you're in, you can find our partners that are able to provide the furniture. And there's also an email address that you can ping us, and then we'll provide potential partners for you to work with at those addresses.
Very cool. All that's going to be linked in the show notes for this episode. You can either get those in the app where you're probably listening to this right now, or at goingdeepwithaaron.com/podcast for this and every episode of the show. But as we do, JD, at the end of each episode, I'm going to give you the mic one last time to issue an actionable personal challenge for the audience.
All right. I think if you mentioned it before we started, is, if it's someone that's just fresh out of college and got into a mind-sucking position where they're just not happy, I think the key is, no matter what you're doing, and my grandmother taught me this, and heard it from my dad, and I tell my kids, is whether you're pumping gas or you're sweeping the floor or you're the CEO of whatever company it is that you are, whatever position you're in, you have to enjoy it. You have to enjoy getting up and doing what you're going to do. And B, you have to be the best that you can be no matter what it is. And you'll get the most enjoyment out of that position. You'll be the most benefit to others, which is, I think, a very key component of any work today, is that you have to be a good teammate. You have to be a good partner in whatever it is that you're doing. But find, people talk about passion and should you follow your passion. I say yes. You have to really enjoy what you're doing, and if you're not, what are you passionate about, and can you blend the two? Can you create an opportunity out of your passion? So is that a reasonable challenge, or are you looking for something along
I dig it. I love it, and I think that it's particularly edifying for me and for the audience to hear someone in office furniture wholesaling, and I would even say like my own path into media and marketing, like that was not the major that I had. That's never something I would have pointed to as a particular passion from like the earliest breath or memory that I might have, but that passion and that enjoyment, that satisfaction, all these kind of adjacent words can happen in a number of different industries, different verticals, and being too constrained in that view can also be a part of the mistake. Say like, well, this is the only thing that can possibly give me fulfillment or joy, as opposed to recognizing how intellectually stimulating and fascinating and human-centered almost any work can be.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
Beautiful.
And, so thanks.
Yeah. JD, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. It was great talking to you.
We just went deep with JD Ewing. Hope everyone out there has a fantastic day.